Discuss is Republican Congressman Ryan Zinke from the great state of Montana. He is a member of both the House Foreign Affairs and Appropriations Committees. Congressman, so great to have you back on the show, and thank you again so much for your service.
Well, it's great to be with you. And the affordability. A lot of it breaks down to the cost of energy. And quite frankly, when you go back to Trump 45, when we walked in as a nation, we were producing 8.3 million barrels a day and declining. In just 2 years, we were 12.5 million barrels a day and the world's largest exporter. Fast forward, now we see 40 miles of the Straits of Hormuz, really a 2-mile channel, holding Asia and Europe hostage. Had it not been for the Trump administration, we get very little of our fuel from the Middle East. We generate a little over 14 million barrels a day, but we don't get very much from the Straits. So the bottom line is this. I think the president can invoke while we have a blockade and say, look, put it at $80 a barrel. Oil companies make money in the 40s. At $80 a barrel, temporarily while we have a blockade, I think the president should and can bring costs down to about $80 a barrel. I think the sweet spot long term is probably 65 to 70. But the president has is within his power. And you're right, when gas is expensive, that means input costs are expensive. That means groceries are more expensive. Transportation is more expensive. Utilities. So let's drive, let's make America great again and bring down the cost of base fuel.
Well, what about a stimulus check or something like that, like what we saw during the pandemic? Even if this deal holds, it will be a month or two before the gas comes down below $3 a barrel again, a gallon again. I mean, how are Americans supposed to get through this? And I'm saying this as somebody who supports the president and this operation in Iran. I'm just hearing from people that they are so strapped. Could they not be helped by some of this money that we brought in from the tariffs?
Well, I prefer looking at fuel costs, rather than distributing checks. But also it will happen pretty quick. Underlying inflation is in check. The stock market, yes, it benefits that are playing in the stock market, but it also has a wider effect. I think the affordability, you got to drive the interest rates down. That's probably the most, I would say, painful is when the cost of money on your credit card or home loan is well above 6%. If the home loans are down around 5.5%, we'd see a lot of activity and more people could afford a home. So I think interest rates, fuel costs, I think the president has some latitude on driving fuel costs down. But I can tell you the alternative. Can you imagine if Iran had a nuclear weapon? They could hold us hostage and we have far less options. I think the president is spot on Iran. Look, no nuclear weapons, no stockpiles of nuclear material, and no stockpiles of an arsenal of destruction. And the Hormuz Strait, I mean, you look back in history, Thomas Jefferson sent our fledgling fleet off the coast of Libya to battle the Barbary Coast pirates for freedom of navigation. The Straits, yeah, different place, but freedom of navigation in international waters, the United States Navy and the president, I am confident, will stay firm.
I totally agree with you. People saying, well, the Strait of Hormuz was open before. We just learned that the Iranians see the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon that they can use to bring the global economy to its knees. That is extremely important information for us to know about an adversary that is seeking a nuclear weapon. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio has kept saying, they were using the ballistics as a protective shield around the nuclear program, but we also know now that they were using the Strait of Hormuz. But I just keep coming back to this. I'm hearing from the same people who flipped for Trump because they said the Democrats are for the rich and Trump is for me, saying the opposite now. They're saying he keeps talking about the stock market. I don't have any stocks. I can't afford to put food on the table. Is there anything behind the scenes that you're hearing about ways to help Americans get through the next few months?
Yeah, and I think you look at the economy as a whole. COVID exposed that the U.S. was extraordinarily vulnerable to foreign interests on pharmaceuticals, on manufacturing, on rare earths. The list goes on and on and on. And in order to correct this, I think the president's policies are spot on. We're going to have to divorce ourselves from being vulnerable. We have an energy. Again, you look at energy across the globe. I can tell you it's a lot cheaper. Well, although it's expensive in the U.S., it's a lot more expensive in Europe. It's a lot more expensive in countries that now are 90% of their fuel in some of these countries get it from the Middle East. Had it not been for the Trump's first administration and this administration going back to America First energy policy, it'd be a lot worse. But I think at the end of the day, you look at the Middle East. It's been a long time, 47 years of that country, spreading terrorism. You look at, our first war in the Gulf. I have a lot of friends that didn't make it back because Iran was supplying intelligence, weapons, in some cases, direct support. We lost at least 500 to 1,000, U.S. service members, because of Iran. And the Middle East will be a lot better, I can tell you, without Iran being the one that is causing the problems. And their neighbors agree. The Middle East could be one of the most prosperous areas on the globe if it were not for the regime of these radicals in Iran.
I'm so on board with everything you just said. This is why I think stimmy checks would go a long way because, working class Americans who are the president's base, they don't want handouts. They want higher wages. And I think everything you just said about Trump's domestic policy and his international global foreign policy are designed to raise wages. But in the meantime, if they can't afford food, they will take a handout over that, which means voting for Democrats in the midterms. I do have to ask you, what do you make of what we've heard about the contours of the deal that's on the table? I mean, a lot of objections coming from the left are saying, this is no different than the JCPOA. Trump is saying today that Iran has agreed to never pursue a nuclear weapon, but they always say that. I mean, they don't really mean it. They're big liars, as you know. So what do you make about this? How is it different from the JCPOA?
All right. Well, let's look at the deal that Biden and Obama administration supported. It left no checks and balances at all on delivery systems. Virtually no checks on actually centrifuges to enrich uranium. It let no checks on foreign intervention. No checks. It gave them a clear path for a nuclear weapon. So, this deal, I'm sure it's going to go down to the top three. No nuclear weapon, no material that you could make a nuclear weapon, and no arsenal of destruction. And the straits have to be open. Now, how do you pursue that? Reagan, trust but verify. You have to have verifiable. That means inspections. That means, the Obama deal, they couldn't even inspect military sites. Well, guess where they built it? Of course they did. The Iranians are very clever people, and as a people, you look at the background of the Persian Empire, and you look at the history, their contributions. The people, these are very, very smart people, and they negotiate very well on that regime. So I think the president, he's not Biden, he's not Obama. Look, we're gonna come to the table. This is what you're gonna do. And quite frankly, we're gonna verify that you're actually doing what you say you're gonna do.
Well, that's great to hear. And sounds like you're saying Trump will not sign anything that does not include a very vigorous verification, which is going to be music to my ears and probably a lot of people watching this. Congressman Ryan Zinke, God bless you and protect you. Thank you for your service. And thank you so much for joining me.
Well, keep the faith, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.